very young, I somehow knew, obviously I understood this years after the fact when I went through therapy to get help, and that was my initial question when I went in therapy. It was like, why the hell did I go into this lifestyle initially? Why, when at 16 years old, someone offers me money for sex, and I just like, yeah, I know what to do. I'm professional. I'm detached. So that was my initial question when I went to seek help. And also, the detachment itself is quite something that you have to deal with after, because this ability to detach that you develop, they call it dissociation, because obviously it cannot be like a big deal every time you turn a trick, otherwise you're going to go insane. So you really dissociate your body, and you kind of, psychologists are now seeing that you encode two different types of memories even. You have a factual memory of what happened, and your sensations are in another part of your brain. And that's the hardest thing to reassociate once you're out of it. And that's obviously what the girls that are getting into it don't realize, that they're going to have to eventually find a way to reassociate all of this and deal with the fact that, in a way, when you go into something almost willingly, even if you're coerced, you're going to hate yourself for having done that to yourself. So not only there's external shame that you're coping with, but there's the own shame you have towards yourself. Like, why did I did this to me? So that's a big deal.
Why would you say then, like, what is the attraction of selling yourself for sex?
Yeah, well, I think people don't realize what they'll have to deal with after. That's the thing. And numbers too. I mean, at the point it really quickly happens. Like after maybe a few dozens of tricks, you're not going to be counting anymore, because it just becomes preposterous. You're not like, I've slept with hundreds of people. Your brain just can't do this. You just kind of block it out, and it becomes a new normal. And that's where it's dangerous, because you're accustomed. And once you're in a zone where you're in a new normal, therefore you already feel that you don't fit with everyone else. You're in another class. You're, with the word, you're marginalized already. And so you're your own victim of your own shame, and you're stuck in this. Sorry, back to your question.
Well, just the attraction of why,
money, and definitely a false sense of power, especially in their case where their whole relationship sphere. Like, I didn't have someone coercing me. I went into it willingly because things in my life made it very banal, and there were people in my life enabling the fact that I went into sex work. Namely a family member who was my driver even, which made it hard to stop, because when I mentioned that I want to stop, that I want to go to school, that I want to change my life, that person was like, yeah, well, how are you going to pay rent? And when I quit, that person came back over and over, several months interval, offering me again different positions in different places. And I was like, okay, I told you I'm out. I can't take it anymore. Like going to school in the daytime and then going to sell my image, my body at night, the contrast had become unbearable for me. So, but it was hard to move away from that because you know, like I say, like especially if you start young, you've never had a job interview, you don't have a resume, and the people who pay for sex, you identify that they're the same people who would be your boss. The suit people freak you out. So it's hard to think like, how am I going to fit in this reality? And you carry this shame that, like, I know where I've been. What if they knew? Would they judge me? Would they fire me? Whatever, you know? Or would they try to take advantage of me as well? So the attraction of the money is nowadays a lot stronger than back in my days, because I was a prostitute in the late 90s, 98, 99. And then I was a dancer after that for about 4 years. And what was hard is that I kind of had to work my way out. Like I kind of did my life backward. I went into prostitution at 16, and then the more that I wanted out, I just ended up dancing and kind of, but I wasn't yet ready to move on to something else. And obviously the money is easy, but it's not. It is, but it really isn't, because you're not taking into account the externalities. You know, it's like with environment, the pollution is not included in the cost of what you're buying. That's why it's so cheap, you know? It's the same with prostitution. I was making preposterous amount of money at 17 years old. In prostitution, it would range from 300 to sometimes 800 a night if I was working from clubs. Some of the clubs that are way out in South Shore and so on, near the U.S. border, back in my days, you know, so much money. It was easy, and it was a lot of American cash, and the exchange rate was crazy. So there's the attraction of the money, but then I never had any. It would slip in my hand, because you hurt yourself so much to make it, whether you admit it or not, whether you're conscious about it or not. but you're always going to feel like it's justified to treat yourself. I deserve a taxi. I deserve to eat at the restaurant 3 times a day. I deserve to. In my case, I was never attracted to a luxury item. It was more, I'm a musician, so at the time I would buy, I have a very expensive guitar. I had pretty much all the instruments in my house so that I could have my projects going, and I had a little home studio. I had bought my console. So I would use part of my money for the right thing, but a lot of it would just slip. And I would tip people profusely too. I always gave good tip at people who work in the service industry because I thought it's important, So yeah, so you make crazy amount of money, maybe. In their case, it's a different story because they get stuck with pimps.
Yes, if they're being recruited by street gangs, then their money is basically going to
That's even harder for me to understand the attraction unless you look at it through the lens of emotional manipulation. The fact that there's something that lacks, whether it's in their confidence or something broken in their family history. There's definitely a lack, which if they're attracted to that, definitely there's something to fill. But it quickly turns on them, and then they're stuck with having not only to deal with the prostitution aftermath, but also the fact that relationship-wise, they have battered wife syndrome, and so they deal with a much greater scale than I had because I was autonomous. I didn't have a pimp. I wouldn't even really work for escort agency because I was so insulted that it would take half. I was like, I can go to a club, strip all night, gather my clients there, meet them outside, make my own money. I would go, you know the road quickly. You find the cheap hotels when you can rent a room by the hour. You figure out your way around it if you're autonomous. And the pressure to have a pimp was not as hard in my day. It was mostly the older women who had pimps. And oftentimes they were in relationship with their pimps, whether it was healthy or not. Some of them was actually kind of healthy in a way. As in, I had a friend of mine who was like my street mom. And she taught me how to work. She taught me how to position my body safely towards the client so that he could never, things like come from behind and choke you. So again, there's a complete false sense of power and security that you have. You really think you're on top of your game when you're doing it. You're going to realize only after how. And that's the hardest thing for me to live with this survival syndrome. I kind of felt, for example, if you went to the army and all of your whatever it's called, platoon died, and you came back and you're like stuck with this. Why didn't I die? I have friends who were raped. I have a friend who was stabbed and left to die, and she survived. And I have one friend who was murdered by a client, and then he set the house on fire, and her son was being babysit at the neighbor next door. All of this is really hard to deal with me. I'm like, why not me? So you know, even if you get out of it fine, it doesn't mean you're going to sleep well. And the hardest thing for me was nightmares. And nightmares were pretty much articulated around various scenarios of trying to get out of it, being captive and trying to escape. And in my nightmare, the negative masculine figure never actually rapes me, but you know it's coming, you know it's next. So the whole nightmare, it's like a maze that you're trying to escape. And sometimes I would even go back to the maze to help someone else. Like, it's a crazy dream. You spend the entire night just reliving this because you're trying to find new strategies to escape.